The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As we've been talking about, 2 more states and Washington, D.C. voted to legalize marijuana recently. That makes recreational marijuana legal in 4 states. Medical marijuana is legal in 21 states. So there's no question at all that the momentum is building. But only 2 of those 21 states have a law on the books that protects a worker from getting fired for failing a drug test at work. And those are Arizona and Delaware. And there's no state law at all that protects the recreational smoker. So even though you can walk into a store and buy marijuana legally, sometimes recreational, sometimes for medicinal purposes, you can still lose your job for smoking it. And if a drug test determines that you have marijuana in your system, this applies, Lewis, even if you consume it on your own time and show up to work completely unaffected by it because of the amount of time that marijuana can remain in your system, or even without drug tests, simply by admitting to having done it during your day off, for example. So there's actually a quadriplegic named Brandon Coates who says he was fired by Dish Network in 2010 for marijuana use, and he got the okay to smoke medical marijuana from the state of Colorado, where medical marijuana has been legal since the year 2000. He says he never smoked it or was even under the influence of it at work. Dish Network doesn't even disagree with that, but they say, hey, we just have a zero tolerance drug policy. So this brings up one of the issues that is going to be becoming increasingly prevalent, which is if you have a legal substance and the employer has a no tolerance policy, should that apply to a legal substance? In the sense that usually those zero tolerance policies, of course, don't apply to cigarettes, oftentimes people taking breaks to actually go and smoke cigarettes, nor alcohol. And if we have marijuana, I'm thinking more on the recreational lines rather than medicinal, but it still applies. If marijuana has the same legal status as does tobacco or alcohol, would it even make sense? Would it be even legal for an employer to say the no tolerance drug policy applies only to the drugs we choose?
I don't think it makes much sense. In the case of marijuana, it makes absolutely no sense now. But it's tricky because there are states, of course, where it's still illegal. You've got companies in those states that might have employees in other states. You've got, there's a lot going on here. So I think the only way this is going to happen is going to be after we have more states enter the fold, and they will. This will have to be some type of federal mandate to prohibit this.
Yeah, and it's going to be a while, much like with internet law, where a lot of times the way laws are written doesn't necessarily correspond with the idiosyncrasies of the modern usage of the internet. We're probably going to have the same kind of interim period with marijuana legalization, and hopefully it will take less time than more time to get that sorted out. But be aware, even if it's legal, you can still be fired for it in most states. I've talked a little bit about how here in New York at the subway station near the studio where I get off every day, there are more and more Jehovah's Witnesses that have set up shop and are handing out pamphlets. It used to be just one person, and eventually went to 2 people staffing that table. More recently, they've now set up 2 tables with 2 staffers at each, plus a 5th person who actually stands by the stairs handing out pamphlets. So they've gone from 1 to 5 people. I recently got a really interesting article from Sean McGuire about Anthony Morris III. Anthony Morris III is a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he is absolutely obsessed with tight pants that he claims have been designed by gay people. He goes all over the world. This is a guy who speaks all over the world as a professional Jehovah's Witness, and he's obsessed with talking about tight pants that he believes were designed by gay men. Here's a little bit of audio. Let's get into this. This is one speech, sermon, I don't even know what to call it, that he gave earlier this year. Listen.
In America, and I know it's in Europe, here in Italy as well, they have what they call now the metrosexual look. It's becoming very popular. It's not new, but it's new that it's becoming so very popular. And what it means is that their suit, if they have a suit on, or their pants, extremely tight, all the way down to the ankles. Very, very tight. Now, you can see how Mauro and I are dressed. He's got a better physique than I do now. So it's not that you don't dress nice to fit your physique. That's fine. That's what Max and I do. What's wrong is this extremely tight pants. It's not appropriate for a Christian.
Okay, so there's that. And then just a few days ago, again, focusing in on the tight pants and saying God really doesn't like these tight pants. Listen to this.
Not in this organization. And frankly, I have asked sister after sister, you know, what do you think of this? Do you find that appealing, attractive? You know, I'm just curious, because I'm not a woman. And you know what? I've not had one yet that thought they look good. But like I've been telling others, and this is a fact, the homosexuals that are designing these clothes, they like you in tight pants.
So there it is. It's the homosexuals who design tight pants exclusively, and they really want you in those pants. And then here's the last one. This is just amazing. He mentioned that he was in Italy. I guess he did a bunch of things in Italy. And at one of these things, they had a translator. Listen to how funny it is to hear utter insanity about tight pants and gay people live translated to another language just to make sure that none of the Italians that are listening to Anthony Morris III miss a second of this. You will hear the translation happening as he speaks. Check this out.
So it's not that you don't dress nice to fit your physique, that's fine.
Non vogliamo dire che I vostri abiti non debbano adattarsi alla vostra figura, non c'è nulla di male in questo.
That's what Max and I do.
Questo è quello che facciamo io e Max.
What's wrong is this extremely tight pants.
Quello che è sbagliato, quello che non va, sono questi pantaloni assolutamente attillati, aderenti.
It's not appropriate for a Christian.
Non è appropriato per un cristiano.
And I want you brothers to think about this.
E fratelli, vorrei che rifletteste su questo.
Do you remember that many, many, many homosexuals are in the clothing industry and doing the designing?
Sapete che ci sono molti omosessuali nel mondo della moda, nell'industria della moda, che si occupano di disegnare modelli.
Don't you know they love it when you're wearing tight pants?
Non sapete che quando indossate I pantaloni così attillati a loro fa un gran piacere?
Oh yeah, you chuckle. I don't think it's funny. I think it's disgusting.
Beh, sapete, io non penso che sia una cosa divertente, penso che sia una cosa disgustosa.
It's just amazing, Lewis. Anti-gay, anti-metrosexual, anti-tight pants preaching all over the world being translated, in this particular case, into Italian. It's incredible to me that Anthony Morris III thinks about men in tight pants so often. It would seem to me that this is not a high priority for most people, and he's just constantly talking about it.
It seems that he's a very high-ranking member of the Jehovah's, if there is such a ranking system. I don't know. He seems like he's a bigwig. Should hearing this make you no longer want to be a Jehovah's Witness if you are one? Or is this guy just kind of a nut who needs to go?
I have no idea. That's the thing. We've done some interviews with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and we've heard about a lot of the craziness that goes on. And this includes the cover-up of child abuse. This includes the feverent, to borrow Lewis's term, feverent proselytizing, so on and so forth. I didn't know that this was such a focus. In general, I didn't know that being anti-gay was such a focus of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I knew it was a part of it, of course. I didn't know it was such a focus. I'm not sure what rank or what prevalence this focus on tight pants designed by gay people has within the Jehovah's Witnesses. But what I know is I always think every day when I see the Jehovah's Witnesses waiting outside the subway, I think about going up to them and saying, what do you think about the cover-up of child abuse in your religion? And as the guest we interviewed, the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses said to me, they just wouldn't know anything about it because they're probably only in a universe of sanitized, approved information. They honestly wouldn't even know what you're talking about, David.
Yeah, probably living in a vacuum, but at least we can tell them about this guy, and hopefully they watch the video and start to second guess things.
We've got a great program planned for you today. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman, and join us on Reddit, davidpacman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. Welcome back to The David Pacman Show.
The David Pacman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com shows you how to unskew uncomfortable facts so that they will fit nicely into the conservative worldview. Find out all of the latest ways to unskew reality at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Audrey Baugh. Audrey Baugh, thank you for being a David Pacman Show member. You can join Audrey as a member by going to davidpacman.com/membership. Membership is what keeps us free from big corporate influence and free from being under the umbrella of a big media conglomerate. You can also get a 2015 Patriot Mail calendar for free with your membership by going to davidpacman.com/calendar15. And of course, as the holiday buying season starts getting going, anything at all that you buy on Amazon.com, please go to our website first, davidpacman.com. Click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page, and then just do your shopping. You don't have to fill out any forms. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It won't look any different, but Amazon will send us back a little kickback, and you'll be helping to support the work we're doing. This week in show history, 4 years ago, Sarah Palin's Alaska was the new reality show on TLC. It was compelling television, but more interestingly, we discussed how much of it was staged. And I feel, Lewis, that now, if that show came out, we would realize that much of it is staged. Where 4 years ago, we were maybe a little more naive to how staged these reality type shows are.
Yes, it seems that a lot of things are set up and staged and scripted. And it's not surprisingly, the show only lasted one season, something like 8 episodes. And it was a total joke.
There were a lot of parallels between Sarah Palin's vice presidential candidacy and Sarah Palin's role on that reality show, in that both were incredibly forcefully concocted and fabricated. They didn't have that much of a connection to reality. The show almost revealed Sarah Palin's lack of knowledge of the Alaskan wilderness rather than her just lifelong integration into it. It was just so ridiculous and embarrassing. She killed animals for sport on the show. And it was it fell as flat as her vice presidential campaign.
Yeah, and I think that in some ways the show, like the fake drama and pandering of the show, is very similar to the fakeness and pandering of a campaign, is it not?
Yeah.
They seem very similar to me.
No question about it. A lot of parallels to be drawn there, and I think we're all glad that that show did not go into its second season, and hopefully we will never see it in syndication. Of course, we are 1 week past the 2014 midterms, meaning that 2 years ago, we were 1 week past the 2012 presidential election. And you may remember that on election night, Mitt Romney's campaign canceled the credit cards of many of his campaign aides, leaving them stranded and needing to pay their own bills when checking out of their hotels. How many campaign staffers, Lewis, ended up having to pay for their own rides that night, for their own hotels? I don't know that we even have a final tally.
It was a lot of people, and apparently this happened seconds after giving his speech, conceding, and it really hurt a lot of his staffers. And
I wonder if, President Obama won, of course, and he thanked his staffers immediately after the election. Would President Obama have canceled his staffers' credit cards had he lost? I mean, I don't think it's a common thing to do. I don't think this is everybody cancels all of their staffers' credit cards seconds after they lose.
I would ask, you've got all of these staffers who are emotionally invested, heavily invested in the campaigns. They're doing all the legwork. They're bringing the campaigns to life. They're the ones who are responsible when that candidate wins. that, and of course, big sponsors. But but do the people at the top of these campaigns actually give a crap about these individual grunts who are on the ground doing all the work?
I really don't know. I mean, in our interview earlier this week, we spoke to Gordon Klingenschmidt, who won his small campaign. I think it was a $40,000 campaign. He had unpaid, I believe they were all unpaid, volunteers going door to door. And he talked a lot about them. And if I had to guess, I would say the higher level the political position is, the more distance there is between the candidates and the lowest level staffers. And that probably creates the perception of a lack of concern for those individuals. But that just may be by virtue of the size of the campaign. It may not really reflect the candidate's lack of care for those who are helping him or her.
Yeah, I think we can say with certitude, though, that Mitt Romney and his his top aides and staffers didn't really care too much about the people who tried to win him the presidency.
The evidence suggests that Mitt Romney was particularly disconnected from all people that are at lower echelons on the economic scale. And I don't know that there would be any exception for people that are working on his campaign either. I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, unless they happen to be making over $250,000 a year or significantly more than that, I assume they're just not on his radar.
1 year ago this week, we had a pretty shaky rollout for healthcare.gov, the website associated with the Affordable Care Act. Former Senator Jim DeMint said that Obamacare would destroy private insurance. Of course, since then, we've seen insurance companies report increased earnings. And it is obvious because we had millions and millions of new customers given to for-profit insurance companies. So why a program that mandates everybody get private insurance would destroy private insurance? It never really made sense to me, Lewis, and of course, it never came to fruition.
No. Of course, there were certain provisions of the act that insurers opposed, certain taxes, things that prevented them from providing health care to people with pre-existing conditions. And, looking back on it, was this really something that was going to bankrupt private insurance companies?
It never even had a slight chance of it. President Obama negotiated with these insurance companies behind the scenes to put something together that they would approve of. And as I've said many times at this point, dozens of times, any number of times, this Affordable Care Act passage further locked in the for-profit insurance system status quo. And I'm very interested in seeing what will happen in Vermont with their single-payer system, which hopefully will be enacted by 2017. I am worried, though, even though that's obviously the way we should be going, a single-payer healthcare system, I'm worried that the Affordable Care Act may have locked us in more to the current system.
Yes, in the end, we may end up with individual states following Vermont's lead. And it would be messy having individual states having their own single-payer systems. But, Vermont is really the only hope we've got right now.
All right, that is it for this year in show history. Twitter.com/dpacman. Follow me on Twitter.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
This week's classic interview is kind of a reference to the midterm elections. Last week we had the midterm elections and we saw all sorts of extremist candidates elected. We interviewed one of them earlier this week, former Navy chaplain Gordon Klingenschmidt, now state representative-elect in Colorado. And I want to remind you of one crazy, crazy right-wing candidate that did not get elected. This is back from May 26th of 2010, just before the 2010 midterm elections. Joan Heffington. Joan Heffington, just a reminder, she believed she had God on her board of directors. Just a reminder about one extremist candidate that thankfully did not win. Joining us on the phone is Joan Heffington, who's running for governor in the state of Kansas. She also has a primary coming up on August 3rd. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I need to get this question out front right away, which is the only other Kansas interview that we've done is with Shirley Phelps Roper from the Westboro Baptist Church in Kansas several times. And her interviews are always really popular. What do you think of her church?
I have not really researched their church. I've heard things about them in the news, but I couldn't give you an opinion there.
But you must know about the whole God hates fags things, right?
God hates fags.
That's their whole. You've never heard of the West? You've
no,
heard of it.
I've heard of what they do, and when they're out there.
It's despicable, right?
Excuse me?
It's despicable, right?
Well, like I said, I know that they were picketing
the
funerals and that sort of thing, and that's pretty amazing.
But you don't think it's despicable? You think it's okay?
Like I said, I can't give you an opinion because I haven't researched everything that they do.
The term saying God hates fags, is that acceptable?
No.
It's not, okay.
No.
So what does it mean that you want a biblical and constitutional reason to exist for the passage of any new laws? Explain that a little.
Well, most of that goes back to, okay, we follow the Ten Commandments, basically. Those were on the halls of justice. But where are the two that Jesus gave us, which is love God and love your neighbor as yourself?
And you think laws should be made based on that?
Well, I think the more we keep our laws like God's laws, the better off we're going to be.
And what about separation between church and state? Doesn't that violate it?
Actually, I think, that was a law that was tacked on to a bill in 1959 by then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson.
But it's a law now, right?
It is but nobody really read it. And to me, we need to be repealing some of the laws that are out there. And I think we've been going down the tubes ever since that one went in.
So which laws other than that, what laws would you repeal?
Well, there's definitely one that we're seeing out here that's a problem. Public Law 95-79, Title 50, Chapter 32, Section 1520, Chemical and Biological Warfare Program.
1520 or 1521?
1520.
Okay, go ahead.
It says, the use of human subjects will be allowed for the testing of chemical and biological agents by the U.S. Department of Defense, accounting to congressional committees with respect to the experiments and studies.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean with that one. But what about, for example, with abortion? Do abortion laws fit in under biblical reasoning?
Well, I think so. I think, I am against abortion. I feel a woman has a choice, and that choice is, do I want to keep my baby and take care of it, or do I want to give it up for adoption? Because, I feel like once God causes the sperm and the egg to unite, it's His will. You have to let it happen. Are
people able to prevent pregnancy, or it's just God's will?
No.
God decides.
Excuse me?
Does God just decide when people get pregnant, or can people prevent pregnancy?
People can prevent it, yes. Yeah. But once it happens, I think you have to let it happen. And if you don't, you will be disciplined. I think you'll be disciplined down the line.
Like, how do you go to hell, or how would you be disciplined?
Well, only God will determine that.
But what's your sense?
For instance, I've known two people who are very close to me who had abortions when they were young and then were not able to have children, and they regretted that.
So
terribly.
this isn't the first time I've heard this. There are many religious people, I guess we can say, who believe that if you have an abortion, you then get punished by not being able to have kids. So you've seen that happen.
Sometimes you're disciplined in that way.
You've seen it happen.
Yes.
Wow. So would you try to make abortions illegal?
I think there are like I said, there are only two instances. I've had to go around with my lieutenant governor candidate because he is totally pro-life.
We'll get to him, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are two instances. I told him, I know you're 100%, but I'm 98, I said, and the two cases would be, say, for instance, emergency situation, a woman is in a car accident.
Of course.
And she's the baby is, there's just a lot of injury, and you have to take the baby to save the mother's life. It will be a rare occurrence, but it will happen.
Of course.
Yeah, the other one is, if they know ahead of time that a baby is going to be extremely malformed,
right?
And to me, then a woman should have a choice there. And maybe she wants to go ahead and have it, and she thinks it can be corrected after it's born. But to me, normally the man is not the one who has to take care of that child for the rest of his life.
Well, we're assuming a lot there, but I know of instances where that's happened. Let's get to your running mate, though. Mark Hollick is his name, correct?
Yes.
So Mark, actually, I read a response he wrote to a press release. I have it here in front of me. Mm-hmm. He seems to be happy about the killing of Dr. George Tiller in Kansas. Correct me if I'm wrong. He seems happy about it.
I don't know what you're referring to. I have not seen that.
It's a letter. It's a response to the Heartland Transformations press release, which was mourning the death the murder of the doctor, and he essentially says, one dies, thousands mourn, thousands die, no one mourns. He says that we should essentially not be mourning the death of George Tiller.
Well, I don't think that actually makes him happy. I think you're assuming something there. I haven't seen that, so I couldn't give you an opinion. I'd have to.
You haven't seen a letter where your lieutenant governor is indicating that he believes the death of a doctor is a good thing. You haven't seen that letter.
I have not seen that actual letter. No.
Has he ever indicated to you that that's his opinion?
No. Never.
So don't you think you should know that if he's your lieutenant governor?
I should know what?
That's his position, that he believes that the murder of a doctor who was practicing within the law is a good thing. That seems important for the principal candidate to know.
Well, I think again, you might be reading a little too much in there, because when you say it's a good thing, did he actually say it's a good thing, or are you assuming that? You see, I think you're reading too much into that.
Well, it seems between the two of us, I'm the only one who's read the letter, though.
Well, like I said, I can't give you an opinion right now. I'd have to read it.
Okay, well, please do submit it to us in writing if you care to, and we will let the audience know.
Okay, and that letter is dated when?
The letter is dated, let's see. I just have the text. I cut out the date, but I see very clearly. I have his email. I have all the information in front of me.
If you'll give me the date of that letter, I'll ask him about it. And
we will do that.
I will get back to you.
Our producer is making a note to do that.
Okay.
So you also want to allow the teaching of Christianity instead of evolution or versus evolution in schools? Versus. Okay. Would you allow other theories as well?
Yes.
So any theory could be taught in the school?
I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought a class, in fact, you could give it like the acronym CREATE.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, religion, evolution, atheism, the end. And what that means is how all of these different beliefs, how they correspond to the end of your life. And I think that would be important for children to make decisions. Which one do they want to follow? And, to me, there is life, eternal life in heaven, and is that the choice you want to make, or do you want to follow one of these others?
But how does believing in evolution negate the fact that you could believe in heaven?
Negate the fact? I don't think it negates the fact, but if you're a Christian, you believe in Jesus, you believe Jesus is the Son of God, and you try to live your life to please God instead of yourself, and that is, the whole crux of Christianity. That's what gets you to heaven, and according to the Bible, and that's what I believe. And I think kids especially should be given this choice. How do they want to live their lives? Do they want to live them so that they get to heaven?
Okay. You're the founder of the Association for Honest Attorneys. Now, you're not an attorney, correct?
No.
Isn't it odd that the Association for Honest Attorneys has only 3 board members, one of which is you, and one of which is God? God is a board member.
Let me go back and explain. When we formed in 2003, there were 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 gentlemen. One's a former lawyer of 27 years.
Yeah.
The other one was a city inspector in the town where I live, and we had known each other for a long time. And the other one was my former boss out at Boeing. And so as we have gone along the way, we had some concerns with one of them, so he dropped out. Then there were 3 of us. There was not God. Then, like I said, the city inspector, he was with us for 4 years until the chemical and biological warfare started happening. Then he was persuaded to leave our organization by
But God is on it now, though.
Yeah. So we decided to put God on there because he's always protected us.
So God is a board member of your association?
Yes, he is.
And you personally have a very litigious history yourself, don't you? I mean, tell us about some of the lawsuits you've filed.
They're all on our website. If you go to our website, you can Google on Association for Honest Attorneys. Click on supporting documents. There are 7 lawsuits there. They are not all mine. Case number 4 is about a man whose divorce went on for 6 years. He was near suicide when he came.
No, but let's talk about the ones that are yours. I mean, you alleged in one lawsuit that the President George W. Bush conspired to kill you and your husband, right?
He was involved. That is my opinion, and I have to say, my opinions are based on research over the last 7 years by our organization.
Yeah. But so your opinion is that the President George W. Bush was involved in a conspiracy to kill you and your husband.
President George W. Bush authorized the use of national security letters.
Yeah.
I believe this is under the Patriot Act. And when I wrote to him, because they had brought false charges against my 14-year-old son, instead of trying to help me or respond, they put me on a terrorist watch list. And, this involves not just, hacking in your computer, monitoring your phone calls, following you, getting in your bank account, keeping you from getting a job, going after your kids. It's to the point that if you go into a hospital, they try to use chemical and biological warfare
wow.
against you. And this is what happened to me in December of 2006. Went in for corrective surgery in 2007. They used something called a steroid cocktail mix in my IV. I feel like when I woke up from surgery, room spinning around, something told me this isn't right. I unplugged my IV and let it drip into a bedpan all night, or I would have died.
Okay, but Joe, I think aren't we getting a little bit into the weeds here? I mean, that means George W. Bush conspired to murder you and your husband?
Well, what they did was they brought such health problems onto me that my husband had a heart attack and died. He was, he was 50 years old. He was a thin man. He was not overweight. He had no trouble, had never had any heart trouble of any kind, and until 30 minutes before he died. And this, like I said, the stress over a 4 to 5 month period right before he died is what caused it.
Well,
I was having such bad health problems.
I am very sorry to hear that. And, just on the whole, though, I do have to say, in all honesty, that in reviewing the lawsuits, it seems like, although you're in this association of honest attorneys, that you've been involved in a number of strange lawsuits, to say the least, wouldn't you say?
Strange? Well, there are other people who have experienced them just as well. And so if you look on chapter or case number 7, that is a man whose wife was actually killed by a steroid cocktail mix. And what did he do? He had ongoing litigation with a former state representative. It had been going on for 7 years. They couldn't get to him, so they did it to his wife. And she
I wish we had more time. We've been speaking with Joan Heffington, running for governor in the state of Kansas.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It is Friday, and it is time for audience questions. We have some really, really great questions today to answer. Evan wrote in, said, do you think the U.S. should implement mandatory voting laws, and what do you think needs to be done to ensure they don't backfire? Okay, this is a really good question, because we've talked about the problem of low voter turnout many times, and as progressives, we're also aware of the fact that the average of all political beliefs is more liberal than the average of the political beliefs of voters. In other words, by having a larger percentage of people voting, you are statistically going to have more progressive results. So this is a very, very important question. The best argument I can think of in terms of mandatory voting, Lewis, would be, listen, in the same way that taxation is something that is part of living and working in the United States, voting could be a civic duty as well. And that means if you don't want to pay taxes in the U.S., you do have choices, right? You can move somewhere else. You can choose not to work. You can lobby for laws to be changed so that you don't need to pay taxes. You can become a tax criminal. You can just refuse to pay taxes. And of course, there would be punishments for that if you're caught. But you do have options. If you don't want to vote, then you do have a lot of those same choices. If voting were mandatory, you could say, well, this is part of what is done here. Jury duty is one of these things. Taxation is one of these things. So I think that there would be a very fair legal case to say citizens vote and you're expected to vote. And if you don't, I'm not saying we threaten people with going to jail, but maybe there's a fine for not voting, or maybe there's some other way that this is done. Many countries have mandatory voting. All of those countries would still consider themselves to be very, very free. Of course, there are countries that have mandatory voting and not mandatory voting that for other reasons would not consider themselves to be free. That's a different issue. And it would be a good thing if our Congress, if our representatives more closely reflected the desires and positions of more of the people in the country. So, Lewis, I think that there's a very strong case to make for mandatory voting.
I don't think it should come to that. I don't think that we need to make it mandatory. I think what we should do is make it easier for everybody. I think voting is way too difficult in many cases because of voter ID and all of that nonsense. But also, depending on where you live and your work hours and other things, it may just be very hard to vote. So let's come up with some type of online system that anyone can do from their home computer, from their smartphone, and let's just streamline it and make it easy. And I think that would, I don't think we would need to make it mandatory ever if we could just do that.
Well, the arguments against making it mandatory per se, the main one is it's undemocratic, right? If you are not voting is part of a free society, having the choice of, oh, I can choose to vote or not, and it's still a free society, and that by taking away that freedom, you're actually reducing democracy. By making people have to cast a ballot, you are reducing democracy. Of course, most countries that have mandatory voting allow you to cast a blank ballot, and in that case, you have a very different meaning attached to a non-vote, right? So just not showing up out of indifference is different than going and saying, I'm here to do my civic duty of voting, and I am choosing to vote a blank ballot. So that's different. And then another argument is more of a fiscal argument, which is in any system that has mandatory voting, there are reasons that you can get an exemption not to have to vote. And the verification of whether people who didn't vote did or didn't have valid reasons would become a very cost-intensive thing. But to me, Lewis, that seems more like a logistical argument, not really one that should dictate, broadly speaking, do we want to have a more participatory democracy or not? So do I think that we need to make voting mandatory in order to truly increase voter turnout? No, I actually agree with Lewis and say there are many things that could be done to increase voter turnout that wouldn't require making voting mandatory per se. But I would seriously consider arguments from people who say we should actually look at making voting mandatory.
I will listen to the arguments. I will entertain the idea, I guess. But, you know, as it stands, I don't like the idea of it. And instead, I think we should just make things easy for people and stop putting up walls.
Next question is from Claire. Claire says, hey, David, sometimes I hear you use the word continuous, and sometimes I hear you use the word contiguous. For example, the contiguous United States. What's the difference? Okay, I'm not a grammar expert, but my understanding is the best example I can think of is that contiguous refers to items, things, bodies that are next to each other, but not within distinct borders. So if you look at the contiguous United States, meaning the 48 United States, not including Alaska or Hawaii, they are contiguous because they are physically next to each other, but there is a clear border between them. If you think of the color spectrum, right, that goes, most people have seen a color spectrum that goes from one color to the other. That's not a contiguous color spectrum. It is a continuous color spectrum because there is no clear boundary between one color and the one next to it. So that's the way, Lewis, that in my mind, I distinguish contiguous from continuous.
Usually the only time I hear people even use the word contiguous is when they are referring to the states. That's really the only time I ever hear it. And personally, I never use either of those words, almost never.
No, and you actually are in an effort to, many people want to increase their vocabulary. You're working to limit it. You're trying to actually communicate effectively with as few words as possible. And but that's a whole other project you're working on.
Yes, I enjoy doing that just because it's efficient and it is a challenge.
Right.
So I would encourage other people to do the same.
It would also apply in some computer-related worlds, right? If you think of files that are contiguous, that means that they are physically next to each other on a hard drive, but there is still a clear distinction between one file and the next. So that's my understanding of it, Lewis, and I know that we have many grammar enthusiasts in the audience who I'm sure will add to our definitions and distinctions.
I am quite certain we will get many emails about this question.
Okay, Derek wrote in, and Derek said, what if there was a blind election where you couldn't see the candidates' names? You simply saw the values they promised to vote on. So essentially, you show up, and instead of there being a name and maybe even a party attached, all you see is, these are my values, these are my positions. I think it's an interesting concept because it would solve some of what we talked earlier on this week of people overstating their conservatism and saying, here's my set of beliefs, but I'm going to vote for a candidate that is far more to the right of that set of beliefs. So you would resolve that issue. But I do have a problem with that, because while I don't think that issues like a candidate's physical appearance should be part of deciding on who to vote for, I think that that doesn't really tell us too much about a candidate. Knowing the candidate's age is not an irrelevant thing. So if you're voting for president and you are thinking of the candidates, it's not irrelevant to me to say, you know, the one that's 35 or 37 and a half or whatever the minimum age is right now to be president, I have more questions about that candidate's experience, and that goes beyond just what are their policy positions. Now, if Derek's hypothesis or if Derek's system was amended to say, not only do you have a list of their positions, you also have a list of when and where they have experience, you could deduce what a candidate's age is and how experienced they are. And this is actually a situation where I might be reverse ageist. Typically, we talk about ageism as being a tendency to discriminate against those who are older. When it comes to people in these positions, when it comes to my accountant, my attorney, the president, etc., I probably would tend to discriminate against those who are younger, and that may not actually be fair, but that's my reaction to Derek's idea.
I think if this blind election were to happen, and for some reason, the values that these candidates put up that they promised to vote on are absolutely true, and they would not deviate from it, perhaps it wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Well, of course, that's the other problem, which is
right.
We know from campaigns that just because a candidate says that they're going to do something doesn't mean they will. So we would also be questioning whether the values we saw written down were actually what the candidate would do. But you would have that issue regardless, Lewis, of whether you know who the candidate is or not.
I suppose you would, yeah. You're going to have people who campaign on something and do the opposite. That's just how it goes. So I think there are lots of things we need to know about our candidates that we should know, that we should see. Of course, you're always going to have people who are going to say, "Oh, that guy's black. I'm not going to vote for him."
Of course, but here's another example. I think, Lewis, that's an example of what we would want to see. You might have two candidates that, if asked to write down their positions, would write down essentially the same positions. But in seeing them talk to each other, putting aside race, let's assume they're the same race and the same age and the same gender, right? Those characteristics are the same. They sort of zero out. One candidate might be far more articulate or nuanced when speaking about an issue than another. Although, if they were both asked to summarize their position in a few words, they might summarize it the same way. And that would be an important factor in determining who to vote for, and that wouldn't translate to something like a bulleted list of positions.
I would say, like with any issue, topic, or story we cover, we want to know as much about it as possible. And I think the same is true with the people we are going to elect.
All right, great questions today from Evan, Claire, and Derek. Keep your questions coming for the Friday show. You can email them in. You can tweet us questions. You can leave them on our Facebook page as Friday show questions, or leave them as a voicemail. Call 219-2-DAVID-P 24 hours a day and say, I've got a Friday show question for you, and here it is. That's it for today. We will talk to you on the bonus show. Remember, davidpakman.com/calendar15. Get your 2015 Hatriot Mail calendar.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.